Welcome into the Toyota Lounge for the DNVR Avalanche Podcast, powered by your Front Range Toyota dealerships. Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR. We got Eric, we got Rudo. We're joined by special guest Nick Gismondi.
What's up,
you
Rudo?
Watched the interviews over with Sopic Goaltending. You might recognize his face. Also, pretty sure the first Emmy winner we've ever had on the show.
All right.
So that's pretty cool. I'm about that.
I'm just honored to be here with you guys. You kidding me?
No, it's all good. It's all fun. We're just a little YouTube show. That's all.
I like the YouTube shows.
Today we are talking about the most important trades in Colorado Avalanche history. I'm sure there's a handful that spring to mind for all Avs fans when we bring up that topic. We'll get into those, but I do have a couple of honorable mention trades that I have to bring up first. Number one, if we were counting this is inarguably the most important trade maybe in all of hockey history, but it fell under Quebec Nordiques, not Colorado Avalanche. The Eric Lindros trade has had obviously set up the original Avalanche to eventually go on and win 2 cups, but also has had repercussions throughout the entire NHL if you go look through the whole trade tree. So
I think it's fun when you look at like impact of trade and just like the way that it does send ripples across the NHL, especially when you have 2 to 3 team deals involved. But the Lindros one, I completely even forgot about that until you mentioned it. But that sort of sets up the framework for everything that's sort of moved forward for not only this franchise, but several others.
Yep.
Well, I was a Ranger for many years, obviously a few years later, and I'll tell you one thing, they were still pissed off about the deal because they originally had the deal in place, not Philly. They had to go and, they brought it to wherever they could to get that reversed and to get that trade nixed with the Flyers because they said, I'm not too sure, I don't remember what it was, and but they say that they had a deal and it was a done deal, and then something got triggered overnight where Philly, it might have been Forsberg, I don't know, I'm speculating, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, hold on a second, we like this one better, you know what I mean? So there was a little bit of shenanigans going on there. Philly ended up being the winner of the Philly ended up being the trade partner of the Nordiques, and to be honest with you, he set up the Avalanche franchise, obviously, because it moved a few years down the road. But probably was the start also of the downfall in the sense it was such a great trade. But what they saw for a couple years after that was still the same thing. You know what I mean? Where all of a sudden they had 1 year where they made the playoffs, and then they went back to being dead last or whatever they were. It was Avalanche fans don't realize how bad the Nordiques were for so many freaking years before they showed up. You know what I mean? And again, I use it all the time. I'm biased because my old man did inherit that trade. When you think about it, he did not make that trade, right? So, but it's what you do with the ingredients. It's what you do with your recipe, and that's why I always use that line because it stems from that trade. So, a very important trade you bring it up.
Use some of those trade pieces for another guy we're going to talk about later in the show to get him to come to Colorado. So there's some impact there for sure. You kind of mentioned it. Your father traded, some pretty high round guys, some first overall picks, in fact, in Colorado, or at the end with Quebec, whatever you want to call it, that in between that offseason. But there's one other trade I want to talk about. Chad has already snuffed it out. A guy gets traded for a first-round pick, and some kid named Stefan Fiset ends up in Colorado. The Eric Lacroix trade. Got to go on the honorable mentions.
Yeah, and I tell the guys all the time. And it's a funny story, if I can just add to it, because I was part of it. And I went on a show last week in L.A. there, the mayor, Mayor Man or whatever, the podcast, and he was asking me about the trade, and it was so funny because I was living with Rob Blake. We were in LA, and obviously Blakey was gone for a few weeks back home to visit his parents, and I was at the house. I was living at his house, and somebody else was there, and it was like an afternoon, and we were in the hot tub in the back, getting ready to go to freaking dinner, and nice. It was a nice like Friday night or whatever it was, Thursday night. And the phone rang, and again, we didn't have our cell phones back then always. That was the hard line, and the guy that was in my house is like, hey, it's phone's for you, and it's Sam McMaster, which was our GM of the LA Kings. And I'm like, oh, great, yeah, Sam's calling me from St. Louis, on a Thursday night, I'm sure. Yeah, great, Rob Blake, oh, you funny guy. You know what I mean? I'm thinking, oh, it's Blakey, right? So So I grabbed the phone in the hot tub, and Sam McMaster, my GM, and he's like, "Hey, we've traded your service," and I'm like, "All right, Sammy boy, yeah, you're a funny guy," and and I give it to him. I do. I mean, the things I said I can't repeat there was not very nice, and I'm 100% thinking it's Blakey, 100%. You know what I mean? So I'm like. And then he kept going, and he's like, "No, this is a serious conversation. I'm sure it is, there, Sammy boy." And then all of a sudden, like, when you recognize the voice, and you're like, "Oh," and it just kind of hit me, and I couldn't breathe, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And then he's like, anyway, long story short, he's like, "Well, we've traded your services, as you know," and I blanked out. Like, I was so happy in LA, it was awesome, and this is where I got my real start after Toronto, and I really couldn't think. And he's like, "Well, you know where you're going, obviously," and I'm like. Finally, I said to him, "What do you mean I know where I'm going?" He's like, "Well, you know." And I said, "I don't fucking know." And then I got pissed off again. You know what I mean? Like, "I'm sorry. Like, I don't mean to be rude, but what?" And well, Colorado. And I was like, "What?" And it was the weirdest thing. You know what I mean? And then he was like, "Oh, you don't know?" And I'm like, "Well, then you don't know my father." You know what I mean? Because that's not how he works. And I had no idea. And then my phone rang 5 minutes later. It was Mark Crawford, which had said to me, he was my coach in the minors, obviously. And he's like, "Hey, listen, that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to acquire, a left winger, and we felt that you were the guy. And we told Pierre that, step aside, and we'll decide on the, as they always did. It was about 7, 8 guys deciding on trades, just like the Avalanche do nowadays. And they decided to go for it. So here it was. It was awesome. Met my wife. 3 kids later. Denver's home. Love it.
What's that like playing for your pops, though? I mean, was there apprehension of that? I mean, you guys always had an unbelievable relationship, but that's got to be a little like, oh, God, got to perform for my dad now, right?
Yeah. You know what? It's a lot of pressure, and especially on that team, you wanted to be part of a team like that. It was amazing. And I tell you one thing, it was such a formidable team. It was unreal teammates, unreal Hall of Famers. But, it's great until it's not, right? And we can do another show on that one day. And, then it wasn't good. Then I walked upstairs and I said, "Trade me now," like in Slapshot, right? Trade me right effing now, and then anyway. But yeah, it's a funny one. But it wouldn't go down as one of the greatest trades in the history of the Avs. But certainly was a fine one.
They paid a first plus for you, and I think they traded you back to LA for like a 6th or something. So
yeah, we swapped first because this is the year, so people understand. Like, this is the year that Pierre was trying to get Vinny Lecavalier. So in order to get Vinny Lecavalier, he felt that if he could get 4 first-round picks, which he did, he got reach. For me, it was more a flop of the first. And LA was not a very good team, so they flopped first-round picks. So it ended up being me and Martin Skula for Fizz and somebody else. So it ended up being a good trade. I mean, like, Skula ended up, being a Stanley Cup winner.
Matthew Biron was the pick that they.
Yeah, so Biron never played. But they flopped picks in order to get into the top 5. Hopefully, to get Lecavalier, but ended up not getting Lecavalier. But they got 4 guys that played in the NHL for a long time. So
those 4 picks worked out pretty well for him in the end. All right. Getting into the main topic of today, we identified 7 and then later added an 8th one for potential most important trades for the Colorado Avalanche. Most of these names are names you will recognize as possible options. Obviously, the Patrick Waugh trade, more recently, Duchesne O'Reilly trades. You also have the Blake and Bourque trades on the defensive end. Claude Lemieux, Artturi Lehkonen, and Nazem Kadri. Those are the guys that we're going to be talking for the most part about when it comes to the trades today. I'm open to other options in chat if you guys have one you think we missed. But these are the main ones I want to focus on. And let's just start chronologically here with Claude Lemieux first. The guy I really want to compare him to, because I'm curious which one you guys think is a better trade, is the Claude Lemieux versus Artturi Lehkonen conversation. Now, certainly when the Avs traded for Lemieux, he was a much more established NHL player than Lehky was, Lemieux having Conn Smythe trophies and things like that. But Lehky also has, a Stanley Cup winning goal under his trade tree, and it gets hard because Lecky's career is far from over. But with Claude, let me ask you guys this. Do you think the Avs win that 96 Cup without Claude Lemieux?
No, I think you go ahead. You start.
No. You go because I can go. Obviously being around it, but I want to hear what you got to say first.
Yeah, I mean, I think his impact was huge, right? Because he was kind of that complete guy for the team where not only was he contributing, from an offensive standpoint, but he was contributing from that shutdown standpoint. And he might have been the most intimidating guy to play against at the time. I mean, he had such a mean streak. And I was in the city that shall not be mentioned at the time. I was in Detroit. And when you looked at it from that perspective, you looked at Claude Lemieux like, oh my God, this guy, like, what can he do? And I was playing hockey at the time. And I remember watching him in my younger years being like, this is not a guy I would ever want to go up against. So when you have a guy who's a threat like that, not only offensively, but shut down, and then you add the physicality to it, I think he brought something to that Avalanche team in those years that was really unmatched. I mean, I can't really think of another guy since Claude Lemieux that has had that immense triple threat and was that physical of a presence, but also an offensive contributor.
Yeah, I'll second that. I love what you just said. But I'll rewind the tape, because Rudo, you brought up the Lindros trade, right?
Yep.
And what I said, and again, I'll say it again because it was brought up to me so many times, like the recipe, there was no recipe. The ingredients were there. They didn't have a recipe. And if you look at what happened from the Lindros trade after that, obviously everybody gets fired. Pierre takes over in Quebec. And next thing you know, their group, with Gou and guys like that, Francois Giguere, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, what is wrong here? And I always compare everything to food, as you guys know, and it's like, let's say it's a chicken parm, like they just had the wrong ingredients. They're like, we'd rather have mozzarella cheese, and what I mean, and Claude fell into that somewhere somehow. But first they were like, they weren't afraid to get rid of first overall pick Matt Sundin. They weren't afraid to get first overall pick. And again, it's not on your list, but it's a very important one. Owen Nolan for Sandis Ozolinsh.
Sure.
Unbelievable. It changed the dynamics of their team. Crawford was a big believer in having like a rover back there. The Avs didn't have it. They had our buddy Sly for another show. They had guys like that, Footy, Krupe. They're guys that weren't offensively minded, and Krupe was a freaking rover. Like he was a wild man. What I mean? He was so awesome. So they traded Owen Nolan first overall. They weren't afraid to make those moves to change the ingredients of the chicken parm. And then when it came to that, they saw it. And you got to remember, my dad's from Montreal. Big fan of Sam Pollock, Scotty Bowman. God, I hate saying that, Red Wing, but it's fine. Big fan of those guys. And when you think about it, the Montreal influence was huge. And all of a sudden, they get the ability to get Patty a little bit down the road, and we'll get to that. But before that, Claude Lemieux, it's exactly why Claude Lemieux became an Avalanche. Claude Lemieux had just won the Conn Smythe in Jersey. He was holding out for all the reasons. There was some sort of a misunderstood with him and Lou loves him, but wasn't going to work out. He decided to hold out. So next thing you know, Wendell Clark is holding out when they moved to Colorado. And Claude, it's a three-way trade, right, with Stevie Thomas and Claude and Wendell Clark. And Claude Lemieux is exactly what the Avs needed. It's exactly now you're starting to get all the ingredients to make the recipe you want to make.
Yeah, I mean, he had, the other thing I didn't mention about him is the leadership he brought, right? Like you said, you mentioned the Conn Smythe, and then, part of a couple of cups in New Jersey, like that kind of umph into the locker room with an already pretty incredible lineup just adds to the whole to the recipe, right? So like you talk about ingredients, well, Claude Lemieux's not just mozzarella cheese, now he's a little bit of that marinara, now he's a little bit of the seasoning on the chicken. He's bringing like two or three things to the table, not just one little, dash of oregano.
And you know what? If Joe was on the show, he'd be the first one to tell you they didn't know how to win. They were young. They were dumb.
There you go.
They didn't know how to win. It was Footy. It was Joe. It was the core that all of a sudden, became the Nordiques, that became the Avalanche. And then they needed some of that influence. And it started with Claude. And Claude can be, I'm not going to lie, Claude can be a prick. He is I am being honest with you. He is a freaking prick. Like on your team or against you. But I'll tell you one thing. One of the nicest freaking human beings there is on earth. He's one of the best teammates you'll ever play with. He's the first guy that would jump in the ocean to go save you. Anybody, not just a superstar, but a freaking fourth, fifth equipment guy or a fourth liner like myself. So Claude was awesome. He is that guy. But you need to be a prick sometimes to win. Just ask the New York Rangers, right? 1994, Mark Messier, Lehky, Gravy, Richter. Those guys are so nice. It's the same thing. Footy can be a prick too, but Joe's so nice. But I love footy. I'm not saying that, but you got to learn how to do it, right? And they learn how to do it through guys like Pepe. So Pepe was essential.
Should Claude be number one on this list just because he helped spark the greatest rivalry in hockey?
Whoa, what a rivalry that was too. I mean, like I said, I remember those as a kid being like, "Kush, good guy." That's when hockey was, bloody, and was. I mean, you would get excited whether you lived in Denver or whether you lived in Detroit. If you were a hockey fan, when those two teams met, I still argue that I think it might be one of the greatest rivalries in all of hockey to date. Even though it's cooled off a little bit back in the late '90s. Oh my gosh! I mean, that was when hockey was. Ooh, it was gritty, baby. I loved it.
I do want to talk about the modern counterpart to Claude a little bit, but before we do, we are presented by BetterHelp. BetterHelp even, I can speak. Make sure you're getting in with BetterHelp today. The easiest way to make sure you're getting the therapy that you need. It's entirely online. They have a super flexible schedule, and maybe the coolest part is all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and they can get you in inside of a week. And even if you want to switch therapists, you can do that at any time for no additional cost. BetterHelp is out here trying to get you to be the best version of yourself. It's a great place to start if you've never done therapy before. Again, it can fit into whatever your schedule might be, even if you are quite busy. So head over to betterhelp.com/DNVR today and get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com, betterhelp.com/DNVR today. And once you've got your therapy in, you can convince yourself that you'll go make some more money with Bet365. Jump in with the DNVR 365 code over at Bet365. You get a $5 bet on anything with that code, and you get $150 in bonus bets when you download the Bet365 app with that QR code on screen. Jump in. The Olympics is right around the corner. There's going to be a ton of fun bets when it comes to that. I'm going to watch a ton of the Olympics. I know you have a little bit of Olympics in your background.
I do. I've covered it before.
Yeah.
You and I should actually sit down and make some
I'm down.
Wild Olympic bets.
I'm so down.
I mean, I've covered synchronized swimming before, so hopefully we can bet on that.
I'm in. I have no idea which country has a good synchronized swimming team, but I'm in.
Sweden, maybe? Sweden? We'll guess.
I'm
bet.
sold.
Yeah, figure it out.
Do it with Bet365. Of course, when you do gamble with them, you must be 21 or older, physically located in Colorado. And if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER today. All right. So you have Claude Lemieux, and I loved Eric's description of Claude as one of the ingredients to help kind of bring the whole pie together, because the way I see the similarities between Claude Lemieux and his trade and Artturi Lehkonen in the Avs 2.0 and their Stanley Cup win, Lehkonen was a trade deadline deal, but he was an ingredient. He's not really one of those key core guys. He's not the Nathan McKinnon, the Mikko Rant, and the Cale Makar, but he's that extra piece that kind of helps push them over the top when it comes to winning a Stanley Cup. Lehkonen traded for a first and Justin Barron. Obviously, Lehky have 3 or 4 years left on his current deal, I think it is. So there's still some story to be told there. But so far, when you look at Lehky and you look at Claude, and I know it's hard to compare over eras, but who has been more impactful in Colorado?
There's a lot of similarities between the two players. Maybe not as well verbose and well physical and well publicized as what Claude Lemieux did. And you think of those bloody battles with the Red Wings, but I mean, this guy's he's a total warrior. He plays in the hard areas. He's forechecking. He's blocking shots. I mean, this is a guy that sort of kind of does all the right things that you need to put together a Stanley Cup winning run. So not to mention, and also scored the Stanley Cup winning goal. So I think that, in a modern era, Lehky is a little bit more of a hybrid of what Claude Lemieux was. Maybe not as rough as tough, maybe not as necessarily shut down as Claude Lemieux was, but boy, oh boy, I mean, he does things all over the ice that makes that Avalanche team better, and I think definitely is a key piece to winning the Cup. If you don't have him, maybe you don't have that toughness. And that was one thing that they said about the Avs coming into those Cup runs and when the Avs were sniffing it, they weren't tough enough. You bring Lehkonen in, and he provides that, much like Claude Lemieux did. Maybe not the leadership and the experience in the locker room, but he comes in and adds a whole bunch to the puzzle that, it's the little things for him that add up in a great way over the course of a playoff run. And if you look at the totality of that trade, the Avalanche certainly win it, hands down, and the added bonus of getting what they got in a Stanley Cup out of him.
Lehky was a hot commodity. Oh boy, I tell you, Lehky was a hot commodity right there. And I can tell you, us meeting at the time working with the Flames, we were 100% going after him, and we weren't the only team. And I can tell you one thing: press boxes were packed because they knew Montreal was going to move them, and teams were there, and teams were like, "Okay, what are you willing to pay?" And you could see in between periods, guys having a coffee, and they're like, "Would you pay a first-round pick for him? You know what I mean? Would you?" And I know it ended up being a second and bearing a first-round pick, right? But for me, it was always the same answer. I'm like, you pay what it's going to cost, because
Barron hasn't been able to crack that Montreal lineup either, right?
Yeah.
So I mean,
No,
he's been
no,
in the AHL,
yeah. No, but again, as value that year, he was a first-round pick, right? So it's like, I'm not going to give you my first-round pick, but I'll give you the first-round pick that we did last year, right? So for me, Lehkonen was. And I remember some people saying when the Avs did it, they're like, "Oh, that's a heavy price." I'm like, what? That's not a heavy price.
No.
You do that any day of the week and twice on Sunday. It's one of the greatest trades that, Chris and Joe made in their staff in the last, whatever it is, 10 years that they've been together, 10 years. It's an awesome. And where I see the similarity with Claude and Pepe, and Lehky, Pepe and Lehky, where I see the similarities is, you got to remember, Claude came in at a time when the shit years were done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was the right time for him to come. Same with Lehky. The shit years were done, and then it was the right time to go get a player like that, and he was going to – you call that a fifth player, right? He was going to fit in right exactly where they wanted him to be, whatever the level of, that they were going to need offense from him or PK, whatever it is. He's Mr. Everything. He's like the infielder, right? The utility guy, and it doesn't get better than him. So all of a sudden he came in at the right time, and that's where I see the similarities. And superstars will make you win. Patty, Joe, Peter, right? And then Mac and Mikko and Kale. But guys like that are so freaking valuable to help you achieve that dream of winning the Stanley Cup. So Lehky it's outstanding. It's got to be on one of the top trades, obviously, that kind of transformed a little bit Avalanche 2.0 there for sure.
Okay, I have to ask for a real answer. Better trade, Lehky or Claude?
Fuck.
I know it's hard.
Shit.
I
say Claude. I say Claude.
I'll say Claude because you guys know and chat knows, like, I'm older and I'm always all about the Avalanche 1.0 and I'm in love with the Avalanche 2.0. So very close, but because Claude spoke at my dad's funeral, I'm going to give it to Claude. Like I told you guys, he is a prick, but it doesn't get better. He's an unbelievable human being. So I got to give it to him in case he's watching. I don't want him coming after me or slashing my tires tonight.
Again, I think that's pretty down the middle, though, Rudo. It's really it's two very so similar but so different too, right?
Yeah, and part of that is the difference in the era, right?
Yeah.
Lehky's era, there's not really that.
You don't need a guy that's going to go bloody up the other team.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm good with Claude for now. When Lehky scores another cup-winning goal at the end of this contract, we can give it to Lehky in a couple of years. All right.
That's fine.
We'll see if Claude makes the top 5 or not. There's a couple more I want to talk about first, and one that didn't make this list thanks to chat. But the next one, it helped create, in my opinion, the greatest cup moment of all time. It was number 2 on our list of top 25 Colorado games. The Ray Bourque trade coming to Colorado. This one was there weren't any secrets about this one. It was a move to try and get a guy a Stanley Cup through and through.
And he knows Ray incredibly well, but what a tough thing for Ray Bourque to do. 20-plus years with the Bruins, a 12-time All-Star, 5-time Norris. He's 39 years old. He's coming to the end of his career. Obviously, a guy like that, it's super emotional to leave the Bruins. Plus, it's an original six team. He's got 3 young kids at the time, and had to ask Harry Sinden for the trade while he was in Palm Springs at the GM meetings, and was like, hey, you got to put me somewhere that I can win a cup. And it was funny because there were a couple of teams in the mix for him, and one of them being the New Jersey Devils, who obviously, as we all know, the Avalanche ended up beating to win the Stanley Cup. But talk about fate, talk about, making the right decision or the fates aligning. But probably one of the most emotional trades that we saw. I mean, I also think of the Chris Chelios trade from Chicago to Detroit and the emotions that invoked out of the player in the city. But then when Bourque left Boston and went to Colorado, you kind of knew. Like, I remember watching it in the time, and that's when I was just starting to cover the National Hockey League. So I was transitioning from a fan to a journalist, and I was like, oh, man, this has got Stanley Cup written all over it. Like, it's Kismet, it's fate, it's Cinderella, it's Ray Bourque going from Boston to Colorado and the relationship with Pierre and blah, blah, blah. And, I mean, I kind of remember saying, I remember when the trade happened, I'm like, well, the Avs just won the Cup.
Eventually.
Yeah.
They got there.
Yeah. I mean, that was my feeling kind of right away. So, wow, what a great trade.
Yeah. You know what? God, on a show like today, it sounds like I'm always, trying to talk about my father, which, at the end of the day, I know.
Is he in the Hockey Hall of Fame? I believe he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame now. So,
but it's the type of day today that you can talk a lot about him. As you guys know, I would talk about him all day long. So I thought he was a genius, and forget about a family man. I'm talking about hockey-wise, but this one is one of his favorite ones. I can tell you that. It's one of his favorite ones because he felt, them, meaning the Colorado Avalanche and the people and the ingredients they had, you know what I mean? Like, could be the answer for Ray to finally win one. And I got to be honest with you, and I'm not trying to be sappy here, but we were, last time I saw my dad was actually at Ray's house in Boston. So that the last time I saw my dad alive, so it was funny because we were visiting Max. My son was in school there in high school and living with Ray. And then, we went for 4 or 5 days with my brother and myself. And I'll tell you one thing, my dad and Ray talking about that trade with Christiane, his wife, downstairs one night till like 1 or 2 in the morning, 30 Diet Cokes in, you know what I mean? Like, it was amazing because it was like 2 kids in the candy store. And Ray was like, but when did you talk to Harry? Because Harry came talk to me and told me at this time. And after that game, I picked up the puck there at Boston TD Garden thinking this is my last game. And then all of a sudden I went back in there, and then the next day nothing happened. Then they said, okay, you've been traded to Philly, because it was Philly he was going to. Correct. And then there was Jersey, and there was Detroit, and he wanted to stay in the East Coast, right, because of his kids and everything. And then he had no idea. And then, obviously, but what I'm trying to say is it was so funny, the two of them with Christiane, his wife, talking about reminiscing the trade and saying like, holy shit, oh, thank God. Because again, you'll never know if it would have worked in Philly or Detroit or whatever, right? I mean, you don't know. It's speculation. But it worked out in Colorado. And it's funny because my dad had a picture of him and Ray hugging at center ice there. And it's been in my dad's office, and they had moved houses. And so he brought it to Ray, and he gave it to Ray, which is in Ray's basement now, you know what I mean? But it was more like, hey, what a moment, you know what I mean? And that's why for me, I know that this was one of his favorite ones. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of freaking behind-the-scenes stuff. And next thing you know, like, people had no idea. And there was the stealth bomber again, you know what I mean? Like, coming in, and all of a sudden the Avalanche have Ray Bourque, you know what I mean? And it was amazing because when you think about it, it doesn't work that one year, the 2000 year doesn't work. They lose to Dallas. And then the next year, it's like, okay, this is what their theme is for the season. We're gonna win one for the old guy. You know what I mean? We're gonna win one for Ray. And the whole season, that's what it was about. And it became their theme, and it worked. And they had a lot of pressure because they were supposed to be the best team in the NHL. They were. They won the President's Cup. It was a big All-Star game in Denver that year. It was magical. And then Ray always says, God, what took me so long to go ask Harry to get traded? You know what I mean? Because it was so unbelievable. He loved being an Avalanche. He absolutely loved it, even though it was only for a short period of time.
It's funny when guys can be synonymous with two teams and have such an impact, right? It doesn't always happen when the big names move to different cities. I can think of a couple other examples, but I would say, boys, that the biggest one in my recent memory would be, well, I guess obviously Gretzky too, right? When he went from Edmonton to LA, he was iconic.
Might not be
in
recent
both cities.
memory anymore.
Yeah,
that might be a little
true.
further
It's been
back.
a minute since then, but Bourque being so iconic in Boston and then being so iconic, as well in Colorado, that's rare. And I think that not only speaks to the guy the player was, but you can see the emotions on faces, right? And knowing Ray also, like, he's an emotional guy. It took a lot for him to do that, and I think the emotions carry weight too. And I think fans see that. I think anybody that's passionate about their team wants guys to be passionate about it who are playing for them. And with Ray, that was pretty darn obvious.
And I got to add one more thing, Rudo, before you jump in for your ads, but I got to be honest with you. There's a little bit of Pepe Lemieux in there. A little bit of Pepe Lemieux in there. Because, right? No, as a player there is, but Ray's so nice, different mannerisms, but Pepe was traded for Brian Ralston. Brian Ralston was traded for Ray Bourque. So you got a little bit of lingering Pepe Lemieux there, how to get Ray Bourque out of Boston, because people tend to forget Brian Ralston was a key piece in that trade.
All right. As we continue this conversation, a couple other D-men I want to talk about. But first, if you want to make moves like the great Pierre Lacroix for your business.
Oh, look at you. Look at you. What a segue. Come on.
If you're hiring, you need Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate is not to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed has over 350 million global monthly visitors according to their own Indeed data, and 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. So make sure you're getting with them. Ditch all the busy work. You can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. They leverage over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day. It's a great way to find literally, I mean, I guess I don't know if you could hire an NHL player on Indeed, but just about anything outside of pro sports you could hire with Indeed.
Yeah, so, Indeed you can.
There it is. Of course, listeners of this show get a special offer, a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility over at Indeed.com. You can get on it with Indeed.com/AllCity. That's Indeed.com/AllCity right now to support our show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. You need Indeed. And once you're hired, you get that fat signing bonus. Head on over to your local Toyota dealership in the Front Range and get yourself the official vehicle of DNVR and the official vehicle of Colorado Avalanche. Whatever type of vehicle it might be. They got trucks like the Tundra, the Tacoma. They've got the SUVs like the 4Runner or the RAV4. They've got your standard sedans like a Corolla. You can go electric, 16 different electric hybrid vehicles they have with zero emissions as well, the most of anyone. 17 different all-wheel drive vehicles if you like off-roading here in Colorado, as a lot of people do. Toyota's got you covered, whatever type of car you might be looking to get into. So make sure you get with them and head on over to your local Front Range Toyota dealerships, including Front Range Toyota stores that are, hold on, I got it. AutoNation Toyota, Arapahoe and Centennial, Corwin Toyota in Boulder, Groove Toyota in Littleton, Mountain States Toyota in Denver, Stevenson Toyota East Aurora, Stevenson Toyota West in Lakewood. Of course, the official vehicle of DNVR is Toyota. Third period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast. Now, I know some people aren't going to like this take. But when it comes to that 0-1 Cup, as far as actually winning the thing, I think the Rob Blake trade was significantly more important to the Avalanche than the Ray Bourque trade was. I get that it was all win it for Ray and that's the great story of the conversation. But when it comes to building a team that actually was capable of winning that cup, to me, it's got to be the Rob Blake trade.
Well, I mean, what a player Rob Blake is, right? You've got not only the leadership factor, but just the physicality. I mean, I every time I see a good hip check, I'm like, oh man, that's Rob Blake.
Yep.
I mean, some of the open ice hip checks that I saw that guy lay on, again, that's an intimidation factor. You're not cutting across the neutral zone or trying something fancy at the top of the circles in the offensive zone if Rob Blake's back there, because you know you're just going to get blown up and sent everywhere. So I think what Rob Blake brought to the table was, again, a lot of leadership, a lot of a calming presence. And obviously I was never in the locker room with him, but knowing Rob in his post-NHL life as a GM in Los Angeles, I know the character of the man, and I can assuredly say that character had to have carried over and been a big factor inside the room. I mean, you could probably speak to that better than me since I wasn't behind the scenes at that time, but man, what an all-around guy on and off the ice Blakey is.
Eric, does this one hurt you a little bit because it was for your boy Deadmarsh going back the other way in that deal?
Yeah, and here's what I'll say. I'll start with that. I'll be Pierre for a second. If he was here today, be on the show with us, he'd be loving this shit, by the way, because now you can openly talk about it, right? You know what I mean? Where he's never talked about, he's always kept everything, close to the vest. And that was just his way of doing things. But I'll tell you one thing, that one, forget about me, it hurt him. I can tell you that. This is the one that hurt him because my dad was a very raw person, a very emotional person, a very family man. And he loved Adam Deadmarsh. Absolutely loved him. Daddy is that's his type of player. You know what I mean? Like, Daddy's probably one of his favorite Av of all time, even though he wasn't there that long because of the trade. Now, with that said, it doesn't mean that he doesn't like Rob Blake. It's where my dad was really good. He was able to put the thing on, and whatever needed to be done, he was doing it. And, for them, the Montreal Canadiens influence came through again, and it was the big three, right? Larry Robinson, Guy Lapointe, and Serge Savard, right? The big three. Now you had Adam Foote, Ray Bourque, and you needed another one. And they felt that they were going to win by having a third defenseman that would be dominant, and they could spare a forward. It just happened to be Deddy, for a short period of time. Because you got to remember, Ville Nieminen is the guy that kind of took Deddy's spot, and Nemo for a short period of time could do the job. They knew that in the long run he wouldn't be able to do it. Again, no offense to Nemo, it's just he's not Adam Deadmarsh, But for spring to do it, to go play with Forsberg and Drury and guys like that, they were able to spare Deddy. Again, like I said, Deddy was one of his favorite, and then he had just had the birth of his twins, and they were in the NICU at Rose Hospital. It just wasn't the right timing. It wasn't the right timing, and that was a tough one. But they felt for the organization that the deal had to be made. And again, it was another masterful deal. And again, I love Eddie. I love, Aaron Miller was part of this, and Millsy was an awesome guy, one of my favorite teammates of all time as well. What a good person, good player, ended up being a great player in LA. But you're talking about Rob Blake. And for me, I'd play with Blakey, and that Giz is right. The big farmer's butt there. Holy crap. I mean, this was deadly, and I remember playing with him, and we weren't very good in LA at the start a little bit. And I was like, this guy can win the Norris one day. I'm pretty sure, you know what I mean? And then you're biased because it's your friend. And I was bang on because he did win the Norris. And, if he would have stayed healthier, and, he could have probably won more Norrises. But Rob Blake was that good. And he's such a good person, a great teammate. It was a perfect fit in Colorado. It's an important trade in the history of the Avalanche. But I'm going to say it again. It was one that hurt, not because Rob Blake is not a good person, but because Deddy was a big piece. And again, I'm not downplaying all the other guys like Aaron Miller. Those were awesome teammates and obviously awesome Avalanche players, but that one hurt.
It's hard because I think people forget, the human factor that's involved on these trades, right? Not only for the guys that are in the locker room, but for your pops as well. Guys like your dad, guys like you, guys like hockey guys in general, you get attached to guys. They're your brothers, and we've talked about it a ton. Hockey's a family, so you fall in love with the boys that you're in the room with, and the battle and the presence and the go through. So you have to remember that there's the personal element to any of these trades, like getting Deddy out, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And at the end of the day, the job is to make sure that it's the best possible thing. And it's just, I can't imagine how hard that would be. I'd be a terrible GM because I'd be too attached to the boys. And I'd be like, I can't get rid of him. Like, we'll ride or die with this. We'll figure it out. I'd be awful as a GM. Awful. So don't hire me.
I don't want that job either.
If I'm on Indeed, don't hire me as a GM.
Just a quick NHL GM job over on Indeed.
Pretty sure that I'm putting those on Indeed, but whatever. It's 2024, baby.
I want to make a modern comparison to the Rob Blake trade here in the Devon Toews trade. Because I do think both of these trades were defensemen critical to the Avs going on to win a cup. The Toews one, probably more of a bit of good business, finding the Islanders in a tough spot and giving up 2 seconds for him, as opposed to a massive trade for Rob Blake. Toews, the Avs had Makar already. So Toews is kind of more that number 2 guy who he comes in as opposed to Blake, who came in and was almost immediately the true number 1, really, in Colorado. So I don't think Toews quite lives up to that mark that Rob Blake does. And, one of these dudes is is already in the Hall of Fame. And I love Toews. He's not going to make the Hall of Fame. Is that reasonable? Can I compare those two, or is Rob Blake just clear cut ahead?
No, it is clear cut ahead, but you're bang on. It's importance level on a roster. Like, the Toews one is just all of a sudden it just solidifies. That 25 minutes with Makar, right? And that's why, it's so important. Different players, I agree with you. I don't want to compare Rob to Devon because it's not fair. First of all, different types of players. But, I agree with you. One's a Hall of Famer, one, should be a Hall of Fame Avalanche. You know what I mean? Absolutely. But what a masterful piece of business by Joe and Chris. That is, again, I don't think Lou ever wanted to do it, but I think he had no choice. And, that's sometimes you got to do what you got to do in the cap era. And that was a cap casualty for the Islanders, but great business by Chris and Joe on this one. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to put Rob Blake trade at number 3 on our top 5 list.
Wow. Okay.
And then I want to backtrack to the number 4 spot because I think there's a couple of conversations that you can have here. You could put Ray Bourque there if you want. I personally wouldn't have the Ray Bourque trade in the top 5. I get it. Again, amazing story. The trade itself,
little bit more sentimental than impactful.
Exactly.
Agreed. Okay. Agreed.
At 4, I think Devon Toews is in that conversation. I think the Nazem Kadri trade is in that conversation. And I think the Ryan O'Reilly trade is in that conversation. I'm open to any of those. The biggest trade, as far as the most moving parts, would be the Ryan O'Reilly deal. Really, the only part of that deal that ended up helping the Avs win that 22 Cup was JT Compher. I don't know how you guys feel about that one compared to the Kadri trade, who obviously also helped win that Cup. Tyson Barrie, Alex Kerfoot going back the other way. I don't know. Who do you think was more important to the Avs? JT Compher and the pieces from the O'Reilly deal, or Nazem Kadri?
Well, I'm going to go Kadri because it's a lot like, it just hit me right now. It kind of hit me a little bit like Pepe, right? You know what I mean? In this game, right? Kadri's because he's hated around the league and, by the fans and by other, opposition, but, so well liked on a team. And again, what a season he had that year. I'm talking about the last season, like he priced himself out, obviously, by being so good. And again, to an extent, now we're still talking about that 2C and comparing to that. That doesn't exist. It was an anomaly. Like a year like that is not normal. He was so good and he produced so many points and obviously ultimately winning a cup and being a key piece. So I just do believe that it's Kadri is so crucial. It was such an important one. And I love Tyson too. Tyson was one of my favorites. I love what a good kid. Timmy was on the show there, as you guys saw, and as you know, he was talking about him too. And it was, I'm going to go Kadri
Yeah.
Even though Ryan it was still a good trade, and Big Z and Comfort and things like that. But did we not talk about the Dutchy one or no in there?
We're getting
no?
there. We're getting there.
Oh, we're getting there. Okay, I just want to make sure. Yeah.
But Kadri, like you said, 87 or 89 points in 71 games, plus the physicality factor, plus the intimidation. Like, I like trades for guys that are complete players, that are not just in one, myopic box. Like, give me somebody that's going to contribute across the board, night in and night out, that you can sort of kind of count on. And I think Kadri was a big part of that, much like Lemieux, much like Lehky. I think what we're kind of seeing here is all these guys that the Avs have been able to acquire have not just been a one piece or a one trick pony.
Sure.
They're a bit Swiss Army for a team that needed it. And I think especially what we've identified is that all these guys have brought a physical toughness to the Avalanche, which was always the gripe about them being on the cusp of winning a cup and not getting there.
Particularly for that new era cup.
Yep.
It was, funnily enough, the O'Reilly trade. JT Comfort never quite made it to that 2C caliber level.
Right.
He was more of a middle six guy or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
The Avs had started to make the playoffs regularly and just needed to fill out that depth a little bit, and Kadri solved that 2C spot for them.
I would say I agree with you there.
Obviously, his cup year was outrageous. He had an insane year that he'll never have like that again, but it's why he was more important to me, certainly than the O'Reilly deal for Comfort, and by then Z had moved on. And so I'm good with Kadri ahead of that. This one we don't have to go too in depth on. Kadri or Taves, who was more important to that team?
Kadri.
I think it's Kadri.
Well, yeah, I agree. But then I hate to downplay the other one. It's such a masterful move by Chris and Joe.
Yeah.
Taves one. But yeah. So I'm going to go Kadri then Taves. Yes.
Longer term, Taves more important to the franchise, but we haven't played out that contract yet. So.
Yeah.
All right. We'll put Kadri at 4. And then we'll get into the top ones, which I think, to me, number 2 and number 1 are very, very clear on this list to me. Number 2 is the Matt Duchene trade, and number 1 is obviously Patrick Waugh.
Easily, no doubt. You can put it in right now. We can talk about him, but I think the Patrick Waugh trade was probably one of the biggest trades in one of the biggest shockers, biggest trades, biggest moments, biggest oh my gosh, in the entirety of the NHL that Pierre was able to pull off.
Yep. It took some help from Montreal to screw it up.
Well, I mean, you can't hang a guy like that out to dry against the Red Wings and let him have 9 goals banged in on him and then just kind of sort of stare at him. That's just not handled very well. Like, you owe a guy a little bit more than that.
The whole situation is crazy because what played out couldn't even happen in the modern NHL, because if you go look up the footage on YouTube if you haven't seen it, because the way Montreal is set up is all of the GMs and suits are sitting right there behind the bench, and there's no glass. And so Patrick Waugh finally gets pulled, and he comes over right to his GM and is like starts yelling at him.
Well, then he undresses.
Yeah, right.
Mid-game.
Like, would never, ever, ever happen in the modern NHL.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say about this one. Again, I'll be my dad for a second there, which that's when two people have a special relationship in life, and Patrick and my dad had that relationship. If Patrick was here, he'd tell you, and I know he's been on with Megan at the Hall of Fame. They're saying he had a special relationship with my dad, and vice versa. I think Patrick was very crucial to my dad's development in hockey, so to speak, being an agent and then, becoming a GM. And what people tend to forget is, no offense to Stéphane Fissette or Jocelyn Thibault, and Jocelyn used to be one of my dad's clients, so it's not like he didn't like them. I think it was more like he wanted Patrick, because it's that bond. It's that special bond they had together.
I'd give my own kidney for the. Come on, of course you're taking Patrick Waugh if the option's out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's Patrick Waugh at the time, the guy.
Yeah, and again, you're talking about that relationship, right? It was someone special, and then it was also the Montreal Canadiens' influence, right? Because My dad believed in it. He believed in the aura of the Montreal Canadiens all those years. And Patty, that's where he learned all his stuff. So now, as much as I talked about, Pepe earlier and all those guys, until Patrick came on board, all of a sudden now you had the Godfather, right? You had the spokesperson of that mentality. You know what I mean? So now everybody else was going to follow suit. Joe could just play hockey.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to deal with all this kind of stuff. And Patty was the masterful at dealing with the locker room and all that kind of stuff. And he had Claude, and then obviously footy, and then we'll talk about it Keener for a second. But people tend to forget is, and I can say this, because I know Serge Savard went public with it. Serge Savard, my dad, made a trade back then. Patty was going to the Quebec Nordiques, and people were saying, "Oh, they would have never traded." No, Patty was, Serge had grown tired of Patty, and he was kind of like, "Okay, I got to move on from him. It's time," and he struck a deal with my dad. Patty was becoming a Nordique. And, again, they didn't have back then was all the faxes and it's not emails and all that stuff. And the league was a little different, right? With the league call, you had to wait till the morning. And you know what I mean? It wasn't just all of a sudden you go on the internet. And so they struck a deal at night. And then the next morning, Pierre got to the office early and Serge called him. And he said, "You're the first person I called, but there's no Patrick Roy deal. I've been fired."
You know what else was cool? I think what happens is we forget about the addition of Keane, the captain of the Montreal Canadiens, who comes over in that deal with Waugh, right? Because you get that leadership, that extra little oomph in the locker room that, as you mentioned, they sort of needed a little bit of. And I the only other thing I want to go back to is just having that special relationship that Pops had with Waugh also brings another element. You've got Waugh pissed off as all hell, like a hornet's net that just got, urinated on, and he comes over, and now he's with Pierre, his good friend, in the relationship. He's in a locker room where he knows how to win, and now he's motivated like no other to win a Stanley Cup because he just wants to throw the middle finger up at the Habitants because of treating him like they did and letting him get railed for 9 goals. So it all factors in, man, and the personal side of it. And obviously, I knew your dad and got to know him very well and loved him dearly also. And I can see that, your dad just had a way about him that you wanted to go through a wall of fire for the guy. And I think that all of these pieces, all of these trades, at least the ones that Pierre was involved in, guys were like, "Yeah, I'm going to go win this for Pierre."
Yep.
I think that factors.
Yeah, and it was more like I said, he wanted to go get Patty, and he got him. Didn't work, and it didn't work in Quebec, obviously, because of what I just said. And then next thing you know, it's a question of timing, right? The timing came that crazy night where all of a sudden Montreal had just fired everybody, and Reggie Hull, a great man, by the way. Reggie is still an outstanding human being, and was just a rookie. GM and Mario Tremblay behind the bench, and they just kind of handle things a little probably wrong. You know what I mean? When you think about it, when it comes down, Patrick was a complex individual. We all know that, and I love Patty.
He's a goalie. He's a goalie. The only normal goalie I know is your son.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, it's all about timing in life, and all of a sudden that was their timing. Now I think he felt that night, okay, I'm going to get him this time. When I say I is we are going to get him. And it was all about timing and what people tend to forget, and I think Giz just touched on it a little bit. Patty was a big fan of Mike Keane, and there was a little bit of conversation in the sense that Patty was my dad was his agent, and I always knew that Patty was in love with Mike Keane, and it was the perfect guy for a locker room. And Patty always believed in Keener to bring the message in the locker room the right way. Montreal Canadiens, obviously Keener went on to Dallas and did the same thing in Dallas, and they won in Dallas to the Montreal Canadiens influence. So all of a sudden, Keener became a big key factor in that trade as well. And it was more like they had Reggie, in the cables like a boxer. They knew, and the pressure cooker. They knew they had to make that deal happen as quickly as possible. And then obviously Kovalenko's dad being part of it, Martin Rosinski, but the part was more like, yeah, and you got to give me Mike Keane as well. Excuse me, Mike Keane was the captain of Montreal Canadiens at the time. People don't realize that. And then it was like, huh, what? Well, okay, and then there's no deal, So
he was
anyway.
like Kevin Costner in Draft Day. You
it's exactly.
mother.
and then all of a sudden, like Keener becomes a key component of the Avalanche, and again the influence with footy, and obviously footy learning from Pepe and Keener and Patty. All of a sudden now you had the guys that were going to carry that torch in the locker room. And, that was a crucial trade.
Well, and the great part about this is there's no roadmap to building a winner. Obviously, moves like Patrick Waugh and Claude Lemieux are cemented in history as moves that did build a winner because they were winners in the first place. They brought in winners, but then you have trades for someone like a Rob Blake who hadn't won yet and came and helped Ray Bourque win one. And in the modern era, that's the Matt Duchene trade. Now, this is a little bit different from the rest of the trades on this list because Duchene wanted out of Colorado. It was this long, protracted situation where things kind of soured by the end of it. But the Avs absolutely extracted the maximum value they possibly could have out of a guy that didn't want to be here.
That's a Picasso trade,
Yep.
if you ask me, because not only was it super masterful, but it was I think it was the it was the Avalanche coming into their own, Joe coming into his own about really being patient with a trade. Obviously, Duchene's represented by Pat Brisson. He's one of the top agents in the National Hockey League
like
to
$1
this day.
billion in
He's
the
got
league.
like tons and like you name it, and he's got them. And I know Pat well. He represents one of my best friends, and I love Pat. But Pat's intimidating. Pat's a bear. Pat's going to get what he wants. Yeah. And Pat's putting pressure on the Avs. The Avs are standing pat. Brisson's advising that Duchene holds out of training camp, and so. To Duchene's credit, when he decided not to hold out, the leverage sort of disappeared, which is what Sakic and the boys were looking to do. And as soon as that happened, the status quo changed, and they were able to pull off what they pulled off. But it was exemplary for Joe and the boys to pull off what they did there.
The two main pieces being Sam Girard and Bowen Byram, both ending up on that defense for their cup win. So.
Awesome trade again, masterful, and again, it's probably like I always say, it was right timing. Just like as for Pierre and the Patty Waugh, it was the right timing because there was an event in Montreal that, and then obviously the pressure cooker of Montreal and Reggie being new at his job, and again, like I said, not bagging on Reggie because he was an awesome man. That just it was just the wrong timing. It just kind of blew up in their face, the franchise, and it's the same thing with Joe and Chris on the Matty Duchene thing, because they were at a stage where they could wait, and not everybody can wait. Like where you are in a franchise, and if you would have asked me, like I would have got rid of them earlier. That's why I wouldn't be a good GM. And I would have. So, and I was part of those management teams. I'm like, maybe we should get rid of them. And again, patience was a virtue here. And again, Joe showed a lot of patience with Bednar, showed a lot of patience, with everything else. And I think Joe is allowed to have patience, because he is Joe. He is the franchise. He is, when you say Colorado Avalanche, you say Joe Sakic, and that's how much respect I have for Joe. But that trade is exactly that. It's they were able to wait. They were able to just kind of, get what they want and more. And that's why it's at, towards the top of the list and in on this list right here, and it was masterful job by them.
Well, those assets, like we kind of sort of touched on earlier, built the 2022 team.
Yeah, exactly. It fleshed out that defense in a way that, don't get me wrong, Cale Makar was going to be awesome at the top of it no matter what.
For sure.
But it was three full pairings that just murdered teams in that playoffs.
Yep.
I do got to ask you one thing about this trade, though, Eric, because there was a rumor floating around at the time that it was very close to a done deal with Duchene on the draft floor for Noah Hannafin and some other pieces.
Yes, I gotta be honest with you. I wasn't working with Calgary that year, but I do remember talking with them about they were inquiring about Maddie, and that's what you do, right? You call around people that you know, and I want to say maybe you're right. Might have been Noah Hannafin, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was that close, but you know what I mean.
Okay.
I think there was talks, but I don't think it ever got that close.
Sure.
In my book,
fair.
I do believe Valimaki was part of that too. Right, he had been drafted.
So they'd have gotten some defense one way or another, whichever deal they ended up going with.
Yep.
All right. Well, there you have it. That's my top 5 list, our top 5 list of the most important Avalanche trades out there. Beyond those, there are a couple that we didn't really talk about that I think were important, but probably don't quite make the cut. Things like the Eric Johnson trade.
Oh, yeah.
More recently, the Darcy Kemper trade. All big ones, but
that's a good list.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to compete with a list that has 2 Hall of Famers on it. Arguably the biggest trade as far as number of pieces in Avalanche history, and the Duchesne trade, and then Kadri, Lemieux. Just guys that helped you win a cup. No big deal.
A lot of history now. We said that the other day. A lot of history with the Avalanche now, which is nice, right? It's 29 years, whatever it is. It's awesome, and again, I'd like to. I'm going to get a hold of them. Mark Crawford, again, original Avalanche coach. I'm going to get a hold of him. We'll get him on the show. I love Crow. He can talk hockey all day long. And again, I'm telling you right now, and we can't have more than 5 on the list. He would be, are you guys nuts? Ozil Lynch is at the top of the list. So I'm telling you, Crow would tell you that it just so changed the franchise and everything. And again, that's the coach talking, right? So all of a sudden he brought so much.
Definitely important. I can't realistically put him over Rob Blake, though.
No. I know. I just said, if you're asking a guy like that, a coach at that time, he would tell you, oh, buddy, that Ozil Lynch trade was huge. He was a big fan. Even though he didn't play Ozil, when we were leading, because then he would just be like, have a seat, Ozil. We're in the lead now. You're good. You don't need to play. But he was a face and a trade that changed, the dynamics of the team.
For sure. It's hard to make a list. If you have a top 5 that's different from ours, tweet it at us, DNVR_Avalanche. We do have to wrap up the show today. Giz, thank you for coming on.
Hey, Kim, this is great. I love it. Do we get to drink these beers, by the way?
Yeah, just shotgun one right now.
Let's go. I'm in.
If you want to shout out your socials or wherever people can find you, go off.
Yeah, just I'm at Nick Gismondi, NickGismondi on Instagram and on Twitter. Definitely reach out and say hi. I love talking hockey.
There you go. We appreciate y'all. We are off for the weekend. We'll be back Monday. Hopefully something happens in the NHL in July, but my hopes aren't high for that. So we'll see you then.
Y'all silly like the mayor.
All city like the mayor. Yeah.